the event of escalation of the United States doing a nuclear strike on Iran?
Well, let me just start by saying that I disagree with your premise that
But but
Pakistan.
but Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. That's the difference.
Just a second. You're getting ahead of myself.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider being a YouTube member, a Patreon, or small amounts in the link given in the description box. We rely on you. Without further ado, let me welcome Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter is a former United States Marine Corps intelligence officer, former United Nations Special Commission weapons inspector, author, and commentator. Scott, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Thank you very much for having me.
I want to focus on Ukraine and the Middle East, but I think my first question kind of connects both, given Jeffrey Sachs was recently asked if he thinks Trump is sincere about having peace in Ukraine, and he categorically said that he thinks that Trump is sincere in having peace in Ukraine. I suspect you have similar views, but correct me if I'm wrong. On the other hand, the Middle East policy of Trump can be defined as giving green signal to genocide in Gaza and full of war plans on Yemen and Iran. So my question to you is how do you connect the two?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to connect the two in terms of um, saying anything that implies that I support um, the Trump administration's um, current policies as being implemented in the Middle East. But there is a logical connection between the two. I think he's sincere in both regards. Um, in terms of Ukraine, Russia, understand that what Trump has done has made decisions based upon the reality on the ground in Ukraine. These are decisions that are washed in blood. We can call it a peace initiative, but it's based upon the success of the Russian military in a war of attrition against the Ukrainians. It has killed, by some estimations, over 1 million Ukrainians and over 100,000 Russians. So let's not pretend for a moment that Donald Trump's policies in Ukraine are policies that are based upon, purely peaceful, nonviolent solutions. Every aspect of the negotiation is based upon seeking to restrict violence, but using that as leverage, meaning that if you don't do this, then this will happen. To include with Russia, if you don't work with us here, we will continue to flow weapons into Ukraine that will end up killing Russians. So let's stop pretending that Donald Trump is about butterflies and music and rainbows when it comes to Ukraine, and he's an evil, blood-sucking, bastard when it comes to the Middle East. When we're talking about ongoing acts of war, in both the Ukraine situation and the situation in the Middle East, were ongoing acts of war that were inherited by the Trump administration. Can we have agreement on that? The answer, of course, is yes. Trump didn't start any of this. People say, well, no, he's bombing the Houthi. Oh, Biden started bombing the Houthi, and the Houthi unilaterally stopped doing things that brought an end to that conflict, but now they're doing it again, thereby triggering an American response. Again, this doesn't mean that I approve of what the Americans are doing. If you actually have gone back and I reject this. I think it's stupid policy. I think it's doomed to fail. But the concept that Donald Trump has invented the war with Yemen is stupid. It's asinine. It's ridiculous. It's counterintuitive and counterproductive when we want to talk about defining the situation as it really is. Because I've always said you can't solve a problem unless it's first accurately defined. And I will tell you right now that across the board in the Middle East, nobody is accurately defining the problem when it comes to Trump's policies. Trump wants peace, but this isn't peace that is going to be on the terms of other people. Just like the peace that will occur in Ukraine will not be peace that are on terms of anything that's unacceptable to the United States. We've made certain concessions almost unilaterally in favor of Russia. So why are you surprised when we make certain concessions almost unilaterally in favor of Israel when it comes to the Middle East? Why are people shocked? Why do they say that there's a difference of tone, of approach, etc.? There is no difference. The United States of America acts in the interest of the United States of America. There is no, oh, they're doing the right thing in Russia, but they're doing the wrong thing in the Middle East. They're doing what's in the interests of the United States of America, as defined by the Trump administration. And so I do believe that Donald Trump is sincere in pursuing peace in the Middle East, but it is peace on his terms, and those terms may be unacceptable to the people he's seeking to, have uh, to stop the ongoing violence and hopefully not start new violence. But there is no difference between the two. That's totally consistent policy.
Uh, Following up on this idea that in both the cases the United States is pursuing its self-interest, and in one case it is making peace with Russia, and in the other case, which I think is a bit confusing, given if, as many have suggested and argued, that Israel holds so much power in the United States foreign policy in the Middle East, and given what we have seen from the Signal Gate, the war plans and warmongerings, if that represents the self-interest of the United States in the Middle East, then how does it relate to being a peace plan at the same time?
It's a war plan. And
Then,
what is
then,
the
then,
purpose
how
of
is it a
war?
peace
Oh,
plan?
because when you win a war, there's peace. So you can win a war either by applying military power or the threat of military power that coerces reactions on the other part that make military power unnecessary. Um, again, I'm not supporting America's policy objectives in the Middle East. I'm simply stating the hard reality. And I also, I'm we need to be careful how we frame issues. Um, because the terms you use are they they imply prejudice. Now, maybe the United States is rightfully deserves to be condemned for the actions it does, but putting a bomb on target in Yemen is not inherently warmongering or a war crime. There are military objectives attached to this, just like the Houthi putting a missile into Ben Gurion is not necessarily warmongering and war. There are military objectives attached to what they do, or putting a missile into a ship. Um, you know, the, we need to be careful about how we define things and we discuss things, because what comes from that then is war crimes. One side is committing a war crime and the other isn't. Again, the people that make this argument probably don't know much about international humanitarian law and the laws of war, because a lot of what they call a war crime, while reprehensible, while deadly, while one would not want to happen, they're not a war crime. War crimes require very specific things to happen to become a war crime. And again, you can't solve a problem unless you accurately define the problem. So if you're going to start by saying everything the United States does is a war crime, is warmongering, is this, that's absurd in the extreme. Because my response would be, when it comes to international sea lanes, what responsibility does the United States have to keep them open? Does any sovereign nation allow the Houthi to have unilateral prerogative to shut down international sea lanes because they disagree with Israeli policy? One could make the argument that the Houthi have no right to do this. They may have a moral right, a moral argument, but under international law, they have no right. and that the United States is actually justified in carrying out military operations that are designed to deter the Houthi from continuing such operations. That's a counter argument. That isn't wrong, by the way. It
Man,
doesn't mean that I support what the United States is doing, and it doesn't mean that I think the United States can succeed at what it's doing. But the idea that you unilaterally fall on the side of one party and totally discredit the actions of the other, it leads you down a path where you're creating definitions that have nothing to do with the potential solution. At the end of the day, the Houthi needs to stop interdicting shipping. They have to. It's inconsistent with international law and the way the world runs. And the United States has to stop bombing Yemen. They have to. How do we achieve that? That's the question. And the answer is simple. Israel simply stops its ongoing aggression in Gaza, as they did before with the ceasefire that Donald Trump helped broker. And once humanitarian goods flowed back in, once the genocide stopped, the Houthis stopped firing the missiles. We stopped bombing Yemen. And there's the answer. There's the answer. But if we get caught up in warmongering, war crimes, and all this, we're heading down the wrong path. We need to focus on what the problem is and what the solution is.
yeah, then I think my next question is on the problem. If, as you have pointed out, and I agree with you, that the main problem is the ongoing genocide in Gaza, and Israel need to stop that. Then the question is that, do you think there is anyone at this moment, and by anyone, arguably it has to be the United States, which can possibly put pressure on Israel? Do you see any movement along that direction? Because to many, it would seem that the United States has given a green signal to Israel in resuming its genocide in Gaza.
There's no denying that. I mean, what you say is 100% correct. But here I'm going to throw this back at you. If all we do at this juncture is condemn Israel as Israel deserves to be condemned, condemn the United States as the United States deserves to be condemned for their foreign policy, and we limit it that, you do recognize that that will achieve nothing. I mean, it'll play great in the echo chamber of digital mass media. I mean, there's going to be so many morally correct and wonderful human beings that are, I hate America, I hate Israel, kill all the Zionists, death to America, yay. And you know what happens? The Gazans continue to be slaughtered, and nothing is going to happen to stop the slaughter. So now, is your question about, do I take a morally correct position to jump on the bandwagon, or, as I am wont to do I seek to find a solution to the problem? You see, one of the things that gets me in trouble a lot is that I seek to find solutions to problems, very difficult problems, which require very difficult solutions, and oftentimes require people who have taken a moral stance to look in the mirror and understand that the morality that they claim to embrace is actually resulting in nothing but dead people and will do nothing to stop the killing of those people. So now, my question to you is, what role does Hamas play in this? What burden does Hamas shoulder on this? You see, I was all on board with what Hamas did on October 7th. That's gotten me in a lot of trouble. But I recognize that it was a necessary action that had to disrupt, you know, policy prerogatives that were being put into place, solidified, calcified under the Abrams Accords that would have normalized relations between Israel and the Gulf Arab states, including Saudi Arabia, and therefore permanently, and I want to emphasize that, permanently disenfranchised the Palestinian people. Permanently. They were literally days away from never, ever, ever again having the potential of having a Palestinian state. And what Hamas did is breathe life back into that potential through horrible acts of violence, and both in terms of what Hamas did and what has happened to the Palestinian people. But because of that, a process was created, which is the great success of Al-Aqsa flood. The process was created that brought the issue of Palestinian statehood back to the front burner of international discourse. And people were now talking about it. And say what you will about, Donald Trump's vision. I know, he's heavily criticized for a a plan which is so ridiculous that it's hard to give it any seriousness, except it was said by the president of the United States. And you know what plan I'm talking about, his Gaza depopulation plan and etc. Um, but I said at the time, and I was proven right, that it was not a real plan, that it was an opening gambit designed to coerce a counterproposal from people who otherwise would not put a counterproposal on the table: Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf Arab states. And when Egypt and Jordan did put something on, you know who agreed with me? Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. He said, Trump put out a proposal. We now have a counterproposal, and we're beginning to review it. That's called a process of negotiation. Um, and so that process of negotiation now creates the not just possibility, but probability of a Palestinian state, because that is the end game of this negotiation. And it wouldn't have happened unless Hamas did what Hamas did. So 3 cheers for Hamas. But now we're in a situation where, what is Hamas doing? My question to Hamas is, why are you holding on to 53 hostages? What possible gain can you get out of this? You're
Well,
you you there's no justification for it. None. What
Hamas said that as part of the agreement was for the Israeli military to leave the Philadelphia corridor in the border between Egypt and Palestine, and they didn't. And on the other hand, they were constantly killing people in Gaza, over and above a de facto siege of the West Bank in North.
I know the Hamas thing. But here's the thing. If Hamas thinks that they alone get to dictate the outcome, they're wrong. Hamas gets great applause for creating a process of violence that led to negotiations that bring in people that otherwise wouldn't have been brought in towards a conclusion that could lead to a Palestinian state. Hamas doesn't get to play holier than thou. Hamas doesn't get to sit there and say, well, you didn't do this, therefore we're going to do that. Hamas has no cards in this game. The game had been transferred away from Hamas, because the sad reality is this negotiation was taking place would disenfranchise Hamas as Hamas is organized. Hamas will never be the government of Gaza. Hamas may be part of the government of Gaza, but Hamas will never be the government of Gaza. Everybody knows this, including Hamas, which is why they participated in the discussions in Moscow and Beijing about what the future governing authority of a Gaza, of Palestine, would be. And so Hamas must adjust to realities. And the reality is that Hamas can't get the Israelis out of the Philadelphia corridor. But the negotiation with the Jordanians and the Egyptians and the others can. That larger negotiation can create a framework of confidence on the part of the United States where they can then put more pressure on Israel to get out. That's a solution. You know what's not a solution? Insisting that Israel withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor, and then creating a situation where the ceasefire is ended, Palestinians are dying, and what? Hamas could solve many of these problems today by releasing the 53 hostages. There is no legitimate reason for Hamas to be holding on to these people. The purpose of the hostages has been served. They played a role in the first, in bringing an end to the first thing and bringing a ceasefire. But today, holding on to those 53 hostages accomplishes nothing except killing hundreds, thousands of Palestinian civilians. And you say, well, Israel's killing them. Yes, Israel's killing them because of a process that could be terminated if Hamas released 53 hostages.
Do
So,
you
yes, we condemn the United States for greenlighting Israel's ongoing aggression and genocide. I condemn Israel doing. I condemn Hamas for holding on to 53 hostages too. The sword cuts both ways. There's no legitimate reason for Hamas to be holding on to those people. Those people should be released now. And if Hamas did it properly, it could signal good faith It could a gesture that then could lead to a termination of conflict, which is killing the people that Hamas claims to be that it cares about. See, Hamas has taken this too far now. They had that 15-month stretch of resistance, and I applaud them for that, as horrible as that was. But there is no similar outcome going to come out of this, because the Trump administration is not the Biden administration. And the Trump administration will greenlight the genocide of the Gazan people.
Do you
I'm not
think,
supporting that. I'm
of
just
course,
saying that that is a reality, and therefore Hamas must learn to adapt to the reality. And the other thing that's happening is there is a global exhaustion over this issue. You can only ride this so much. They got great victories. The Palestinian cause got great victories with the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, great moral victories, etc. But the longer this drags out, exhaustion will set in, and people are going to lose interest. And you know what else will happen is that the Egyptians and Jordanians, that initiative that they were trying to push, will lose its momentum and will dissipate and be gone. There was a process in play, and Hamas should have been smart enough to let that process play out, and they weren't. They have every right to do what they're doing. Yes, legally, they can say Israel didn't do this, Israel didn't do that, but it's a new reality. This is not the Biden administration. And at some point in time, Hamas has to put on their intelligent hat, and say, we got to deal with reality here. How do we maintain the momentum that leads to the strategic objective we claim to want, which is a Palestinian state, and not commit suicide over 53 hostages?
I don't want to get stuck on Gaza. This is my final follow-up, and then I have a few other questions on. I wonder if you think if Hamas released the hostages. I mean, it was there was an ongoing exchange of prisoners. There were 8 rounds of exchanges in the 2 rounds, and the process got disrupted. And the argument on the other side is that given all the talks about transferring millions of people to, from Africa to Asia to whatnot, and given the things that we have discussed, killing and all the rhetorical statement coming out of the United States, um, Hamas and many others were very, very skeptical that that if the rest of the hostages are released, I am not supporting that. I am not. I think all the exchange of prisoners should happen on both sides, but they were apprehensive that that is the last. Negotiating bit, if you like, that they had, and given all the signals are going on the other direction, how can one be even hopeful that they would get something if they release the rest of the 53 prisoners?
Well, again, that's a legitimate way of thinking, but then you have to take a look at who you're dealing with. When you're dealing with a nation that has as one of its principal doctrines the Hannibal Directive, which says kill people before they're taken hostage. You're dealing with a nation that deliberately targeted hostages while they're being held hostage to kill them. See, Hamas is operating under the premise that Israel actually values the lives of these 53 people. If the Israeli government had its way, it would have killed these 53 people before they were taken hostage. The Israeli government doesn't value their life. The Israeli government is embarrassed by their existence. And I think Hamas needs to understand that the longer they hold on to them, the more likely it is they're going to die at the hands of Israel, who will then blame Hamas, and Hamas will have to accept some of the blame because, of course, they're in their custody. If Hamas showed that they cared more about the lives of these 53 people than the Israelis did, if Hamas took advantage of the concern the United States has attached to these 53 and carried out direct negotiations with the United States, which they were underway, why they didn't exploit that advantage, and use the United States as a broker to get the 53 out, to tell the Americans, we trust you, we empower you with this responsibility. You then create the potential of leverage that can be applied by the United States on Israel. And if Hamas did this in conjunction with Jordan and Yemen, and Egypt and the others who were negotiating the future of the reconstruction, that you could actually flip the script and put Israel in a very difficult position. See, this is called problem solving. It's problem solving 101, but you have to break things down into their various parts, and you have to assess the value attached to each one and what outcomes are attached to each one, etc. Hamas is committing suicide by holding on to these 53 hostages. This will not end well for Hamas. The world is getting tired. America will double down. And at this point in time, um, look at the United States. If Hamas thought that they were going to generate student unrest and get America broiling, the Trump administration is nipping that in the bud with very extreme, unconstitutional actions, which are attacking free speech, not just of foreign visa holders, but of Americans themselves. Um, America will not rise up in support of Gaza. It's over. That's been cut off. And so any hope that the pressure, political pressure, could continue to be emerge from the domestic American political scene, it's done. The people, we now literally in the United States have hooded, jackbooted thugs grabbing people off the street, making them disappear. That's where the United States has. That's where we are today. It's disgusting, but it's a reality. And so if you're Hamas, you've lost that weapon, and you're going to lose everything else too, because it's going to become about the 53 hostages, and you're letting the Israelis dictate the narrative. So Hamas has one last chance before this gets too far to flip the script and reach out and get rid of these 53 hostages in a way that accrues to them a political advantage that they otherwise wouldn't have. Now, people will say, what guarantees does Hamas have? And the answer is none. There are no guarantees in this situation. Um, but right now, Hamas is literally a person afloat in the ocean with all the rescue boats leaving, and the guarantee is that Hamas is going to drown, and they're going to take Gaza with them. Hamas's only hope is to gesture to a rescue boat, have them come over, throw a life ring, and pray that they're serious about rescuing them. That brings us back to our original question. Is Donald Trump serious about peace in the Middle East? You're damn right he's serious about it, but it's going to be on his terms. And Hamas would do well to recognize that. And one of the terms is the release of these 53 hostages. And if Hamas can do anything to exploit that to their advantage, that would be my recommendation.
Um, my final question on the Middle East before I switch gear to Ukraine is on Iran. And I recently heard you discussing possibilities, legal possibilities about U.S. Nuclear first strike on Iran. A lot of us, to a lot of us, it's very counterintuitive, given in this day and age, if the United States goes for a first nuclear strike on Iran, they would be uh, they would lose any kind of legitimacy within the international community, and maybe there would be I hope that there would be a domestic backlash as well. Um, can you talk about whether you think that there is a possibility at the event of escalation of the United States doing a nuclear strike on Iran?
Well, let me just start by saying that I disagree with your premise altogether. I mean, first of all, I'm 100% against nuclear weapons. I'm a big nuclear zero guy. I'm a nuclear arms control guy. I actually got rid of nuclear weapons back in the day. So what I'm about to say is not reflective of how I would like the world to be, but as the world is. And I will have a hard time standing by. I don't blame you on this, but are you telling me right now that India doesn't have a nuclear preemption of attack plan option out for Pakistan? That
India
if they,
doesn't have a first strike doctrine.
you're
India
telling
and
me
China.
that Pakistan was loading up nuclear weapons and saying that they're going to fire them against India, that India will absorb Pakistan's attack without carrying out any preemption?
Um, I don't know that, but
Right, you don't
India
know that.
maintains,
I
yeah.
will tell you right now that India has a preemptive strike. You don't have nuclear weapons. You don't have the weapon systems that India has. And Pakistan has a first strike policy too. It's not declared, it's not announced, but if Pakistan saw India putting its nuclear forces on full alert, making preparations, the intelligence where India's going to launch tomorrow, the
But but
Pakistan.
but Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. That's the difference.
Just a second. You're getting ahead of myself.
Okay.
Ahead.
That's
Okay,
what
don't do
the
that.
intelligence committee in the Senate suggested recently.
No, they didn't suggest. I'll tell you exactly what they said because I know what they said. I'm intimately familiar with this problem. All right. But I'm just starting off with the notion that if the United States did something, the whole world would be against it. There would be backlash, but not as much as you think. And now I'm going to tell you why. Because Iran is not allowed to have nuclear weapons. Now you're going to say, but Scott, didn't the National Threat Assessment recently briefed by Tulsi Gabbard's Department or Director of National Intelligence to the United States Senate make this case? What they said is this: that there is no evidence that Iran is assembling a nuclear weapon or pursuing the assembly of a nuclear weapon. And there's no evidence that the Iranian leadership has given orders for such a weapon to be assembled. Do we concur that's what they said?
Yes.
Okay. So now I've been saying that forever. I agree with that statement. I think everybody agrees. The Iranians agree with that statement. But that's not the issue. Let's get back to why the JCPOA was negotiated. Okay? Before we get into the whole viability of the JCPOA. The purpose of the JCPOA was to create a 1-year breakout window so that if Iran decided to violate the terms of the JCPOA and kick out inspectors, that the international community will have 1 year to respond before Iran could build a nuclear weapon. That 1 year was deemed to be the acceptable window. I just want to remind everybody because we go back to the JCPO, go back to the JCPO. 1 year window, guys, breakout window, 1 year. Iran today is literally 1 week. 1 week. That is unacceptable. Now, if Iran could articulate that 1 week was simply because they're pursuing peaceful nuclear energy and, the JCPOA allowed for the expiration of sunset clauses that would give Iran the opportunity to put in very thorough, capable centrifuges as opposed to the old IR-1s and 2s, which are very inefficient, high efficiency centrifuges that could produce lots of uranium enrichment, enriched to 3.5%, by the way, 3.5% for use and conversion to fuel rods, which would go into the expansive Iranian nuclear energy program manifested by reactors built all over the country. You can say, okay, I get it. Now, you can make an argument that Iran needs a minimal amount of 20% enriched uranium because they have the Tehran research reactor, and the United States and others have made it impossible for Iran to get that. So you say, okay, produce enough 20% enriched uranium so that you can produce the fuel plates necessary to operate that reactor. But that's like a one centrifuge cascade operation that only has to operate for a limited period of time and then never operate again for many, many years because you don't need that much 20% uranium. Do you need the ability to convert uranium hexafluoride into uranium metal? Yes, I just said you need the metal plates to be produced. So you have a limited capability to do that. What need does Iran have for 60% enriched uranium? And there's none. And yet Iran has gone down the road of producing sufficient 60% enriched uranium, which is literally one step away from becoming weapons grade. One step away being fed into a cascade that has been purpose-built in the underground facility in Firdo. So you jam that in there, you now get your 90+% enriched uranium that you turn into uranium metal, and then you have a cheap gun design that can be loaded onto any missile you want. And that gun design, it's a theoretical now, but it's there. But so you see what I'm saying? The Iranian program as it currently exists is a weapons preparation program. There's no other way to describe it. No other way to describe it. Why does Iran have 60% enriched uranium? There's no other reason to describe it. Now, that still comports with what the Senate said. There's no evidence that Iran is seeking to create a weapon, and the political leadership continues to say they don't want to have this. They haven't given the political green light. But now let's complicate it further. Because, yes, those two statements are true. But then why did the former head of the Iranian nuclear program, the military side, say that Iran could build a weapon very easily? And it was backed by similar statements made by senior civilians. These are statements made last year, February, March, April, May. Why did the Iranian parliament say that we have to put together a committee to go to the supreme leader to get him to reverse the fatwa so that we can do it? And why did the Expedience Discernment Council, one of the senior advisory bodies to the supreme leader, talk about the religious conditions that would have to be met in order to reverse the fatwa, and that those religious conditions have been met? So let's go and reverse engineer now the intelligence program that's been the intelligence that's been given to the United States Senate. Yes, the Iranian leader has not made a decision. But according to the Iranians themselves, that decision can take place at any time, and the preparatory work has already occurred. That all that has to happen is the supreme leader wakes up one morning and goes, go. Now we go to the next issue. They haven't assembled a bomb, etc. The gun design is one of the easiest designs out there. It's not a difficult design. All you need is the fissile material. It's literally a certain amount of uranium metal, a slug taken out, a tube, high explosive, jam it in, and you go critical and it blows up. And it can be loaded onto delivery systems of not great sophistication. I would say that some of the warheads that Iran's using today, that they have used against Israel, have more sophistication in terms of the potential of acceleration and heat to disrupt their operation than the gun design, meaning that you don't even have to test this. And the Iranians have said, we are there. When I have an Iranian general tell me we have assembled all the components necessary except the fissile material, I believe him. Now, they haven't assembled it, but it can happen literally within the space of a week. By the time they finish enriching the 60% uranium hexafluoride into the weapons grade and they convert that to metal, they will have functioning weapons ready to be loaded up with uranium slugs, loaded on the missiles, deployed. That's a nuclear weapons capability, potential that Iran claims it doesn't want to pursue, but they are there. And if you're the United States of America, whose close ally is Israel, this is an existential threat to the existence of Israel. Now, we can sit here and play all the game. Well, the United States shouldn't support Israel. Maybe not. Israel's an evil Zionist entity. I agree. But it doesn't matter what you and I think. It doesn't matter what we tweet, the morally righteous positions that we throw into the digital universe to have an echo chamber, and everybody loves us because we're saying the right things. The reality is Iran has a nuclear weapons potential admitted by Iran that represents an existential threat to the existence of a close American ally, whether we want them to be close or not. And the Trump administration, which has stacked itself with more Zionists per square inch than any other administration, is going to defend Israel. And now that we've defined it as a nuclear threat, because it is a nuclear threat, you can't describe it as anything other than a nuclear threat. Then the United States has the exact same preemptive strike plans that India has for Pakistan, Pakistan has for India, and anybody has in the world today when it comes to nuclear weapons. But we've been honest about it. You see, we actually have put forward nuclear postures for many decades now that say that we can use nuclear weapons preemptively in a WMD environment and a non-WMD environment. And we've taken this posture and we've actually turned it into employment plans. You know who did that? Donald Trump. Donald Trump actually built an employment plan to launch preemptive nuclear strike against Iran. We built weapons especially for this purpose. Now, you'll say, well, but isn't that extreme? again, look at the, sometimes people need to be careful what they brag about because apparently B-2 bombers flew over Yemen and dropped these massive bombs against, underground facilities. And everybody's going, ha, 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 they didn't work. They collapsed the entrance, but the facility lives and the Yemeni came in through another one. Your big bombs didn't work. This is exactly why Donald Trump has made low yield, ground penetrating nuclear weapons that do work. So when people say, why would the United States use nuclear weapons preemptively? I just told you, because the conventional weapons can't do it. They can't do it. And if we're going to say we're going to take out the Iranian nuclear capability, then we will take it out using the weapons that are designed for that purpose. And then the other thing people need to understand is that people are used to pointing a finger at America going, well, you can't really win wars anymore, can you? Because, gosh, you go in and you bomb people and then it's done. I want to remind people that we're not waging a war of national termination against Yemen. It's a very limited attack against very limited targets. You want to look at what a war of national termination looks like. Look at the strategic air campaign that we launched against Iraq in Desert Storm. Sustained, and I was one of the planners for that, so I'll just tell you, it was designed to collapse the Iraqi society. That's what it's designed to do. The weapons we have today are much better. We have a lot more of them. So we can collapse societies much quicker. And if Iran thinks that the initial attack against it is going to be a very limited strike, they're wrong. If the decision's made to take out Iran's nuclear infrastructure, then we will also take out the political component of that nuclear program, the weaponization aspect of it, which is a regime we believe is prepared to either issue the order or has already issued the order to create nuclear weapons. This will be a regime change operation. It will be horrible to behold. It will end Iran as we know it. Now, Iran may, again, the Twitter spheres are, they've got 5,000 missiles, none of which can hit the United States. We could destroy Israel. Possibly. I concede that. Secretly, I'm not unhappy with that, but I can't really say that. I'm not here to defend Israel. Whether Iran can destroy Israel or not is beyond the point. Whether they can destroy a handful of American military bases is beyond the point. Because if it gets to the point where Iran does this or attempts to do this, Iran will no longer exist. And that's what I'm trying to stop. I'm trying to stop the termination of a nation. And it's very difficult because there's a lot of Iranians out there who have a lot of pride, as they should. And they should be heavily insulted by the policy positions the United States of America has taken, as they should. Is it fair for America to make the demands that it's making? No, it's not fair at all. Not fair at all. Iran is on the right side of history, with one exception. You're building a nuclear weapons program, and you're trying to pretend you're not. You're getting too cute. You're saying we don't have one, but secretly we could. But it's no longer secretly because your officials said we could. You've crossed the line. And there's no defending that. Not at all. It's indefensible. Why? Because Iran signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran agreed to safeguards and inspections. Iran agreed that it will not be a nuclear weapons state. These are all things Iran agreed to. And Iran currently is a member of the NPT. Iran claims it's adhering to the NPT. So far, it appears that it has, because even the things that we've spoken about, minus maybe the secret preparation of a nuclear weapon, 60% uranium, it's not against the law. Article 4 of the NPT allows Iran to have control of the nuclear cycle, and 60% uranium is still considered to be low enriched uranium. You can't make a weapon out of it. It's not weapons grade. So, Iran has all this going for it, except why did they allow their people to say these stupid things? These are confessions. These are confessions made by very senior people, by policymakers, by decision makers, by members of the Iranian government. And it is condemned Iran because now the United States has every justification under international law to take a hardline stance against the Iranian nuclear program. Um, and that's where I stand on this.
If I can have a follow-up on this,
Sure.
I hear you. I think there is anyone hearing you with open ears can see that you are talking about the possibility of reality rather than your own moral position on that, and you're also trying to avoid the catastrophe, as we all are politically committed to that. I think my only problem in what you just said is it kind of shifts the conversation to actual political decision on nuclear weapons program to technological capabilities about development of nuclear programs. And what I'm asking is when I was doing my engineering courses in India, we were taught by our professors that at this moment nuclear weapons is not a sophisticated technology in terms of in terms of its difficulty. Whether you talk about the enrichment program, whether you talk about delivery, I mean, you can talk about levels of sophistications of delivery devices. But in terms of enrichment, in terms of putting it into a device and then delivering, we are taught that it's not a very technologically sophisticated thing. So the reason why Germany or Japan or others don't have nuclear weapons is not because they are technologically not equipped, but because there is a political will not to do that. And that's why low technology countries like India and Pakistan has it. So my question to you is that all of what you said, uh, is there a danger of shifting the conversation away from what actual political decisions are to what the capabilities are? And then, as you said, uh, the United States could then use that as a justification to do its nation terminating operation.
So basically, the question is, could the United States manipulate an argument such as the one that I've made to use it as justification for regime change?
Right.
Yes, of course, that can happen, and maybe it is happening. Um, except for the fact that I didn't just make up this argument. I didn't pull it out of thin air. This isn't an Iraqi WMD thing where we have to falsify intelligence and manufacture statements. I'm condemning Iran based upon its own words and its own actions that Iran itself doesn't deny. That's the difference. Why aren't we going after the Japanese or the Germans? Because I don't think there's a debate on going in the Japanese parliament about giving the prime minister permission to create a weapon. Germany hasn't quite crossed that line either, although there's some talk going on in Europe now about an independent European nuclear deterrent, which would be a violation of the NPT. And I think the United States would take a harsh line on that. The same thing, we would take a harsh line if Saudi Arabia decided they wanted to have a nuclear weapon. Um, but it's a dangerous game. I agree with you. We shouldn't be politicizing this. I, I'm I'm in favor of sending a team to Iran saying, guys, just back off, get rid of the 60%. Um, and, come out with a clear statement that we are not doing this. This is not in our interests. And maybe even have some confidence building measures that can be done in terms of inspections of warheads or warhead production capability to make sure that there isn't a secret program. And if there is one, declare it and have it dismantled. Um, Whatever, things that can be done like that to diffuse the situation. Because Iran has put itself in this position. They're not an innocent party here. They're on the right side of history. Don't get me wrong. I'm defending Iran's ability to resist against but if Iran is chosen to have as part of its arsenal of resistance a nuclear weapon, that is a suicide pill. That's all I'm saying. And as I said I put out a response today, I can't be more Iranian than the Iranians. I can't care about the Iranian people more than the Iranian people care about. And free will is a double-edged sword. The Iranians are fully capable of free will. They can make the decisions they make. And whether I like it or not, there will be ramifications. There will be consequences. I'm trying to be honest about what these consequences will be. In the process, maybe people would wake up and say, "You're right. These are harsh consequences. How do we find a way out of this mess? What is the path we need to take to prevent an outcome that will 100% lead to the annihilation of Iran as a modern nation state?" Again, I just want to remind people that they forget that the United States has the capacity to terminate the existence of nations. The fact that that nations that we've gone to war with haven't been terminated is just because of political will. Um, you know, we don't have to lose wars. We lose wars because we opt not to finish the war, because the consequences of finishing the war are deemed to be politically incompatible and unsustainable. Um, Vietnam, I've had an interesting exchange about the Vietnam War. We could have ended that instantly, and there was plans to do so. New Kaifeng, New Hanoi, war's over, ends instantly. Um, we didn't, because we made a decision that that's not in our best interest. That's not the right direction to go. But we didn't not do that because we were afraid of anything. We made it because it was the right decision. But you can't always count upon us making the right decision. I'd like to believe that the United States would never consider using nuclear weapons preemptively against an Iranian nation that hasn't developed a nuclear weapon. I'd like to believe that before we even considered using nuclear weapons, that we would wait until Iran crossed that threshold and showed itself to be an outlaw nation, a nation that has violated the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I'd like to believe that we would go to the United Nations and seek international condemnation of Iran and justification for the implementation of military action using the Chapter 7 resolution under the Charter of the United Nations. And if the United Nations refused to give us that Chapter 7 resolution, then the United States Congress would then give the President of the United States the authority, constitutional authority, to wage war against Iran. And then and only then would we use the mechanisms necessary to defeat Iran as a nation state, because we are now at war with Iran. Iran has allowed itself to self-identify as an existential threat to the United States of America. Um, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about taking shortcuts, and things like that. And we're also talking about a situation where the president is irresponsibly threatening violence as a means of trying to coerce negotiated outcomes. It doesn't work against the people as proud as the Iranians. Their dander's going to get up. They're going to get their backs against the wall, and they're going to fight. It's achieving the exact opposite outcome than the one that we should. We should be offering them a way out of this problem, a face-saving way out of this problem, a way that not just saves face, but also creates opportunities for Iran. The lifting of sanctions is a tremendous thing that could be brought to bear here. And I think Donald Trump is missing a huge opportunity to take advantage of the leverage that Russia and China have over Iran, to use diplomatic indirect approach to have a multilateral approach to resolving this issue, as opposed to universal dictate by the United States. These are all wannabes, could be, should be's. We have to deal with the reality. The reality is we have 7 B-2 bombers assembled in Diego Garcia right now. The reality is that we have not just an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine, but we have other cruise missile submarines that are in the region. That we are assembling a nation-killing force that our doctrine says we can use proactively, preemptively, in an environment where we feel a threat is prepared to manifest itself of an existential nature. And Iran, unfortunately, because of its own actions, has created the ability of people to articulate such a threat.
Scott, my final question very quickly about taking an update on the situation in Ukraine and Russia. I think as I read it, the question now is about the speed of a comprehensive ceasefire. We have had a few partial ceasefire, as I read from the mainstream media, one on infrastructure and the other on the freedom of navigation in the Black Sea on conditions that Russia would be given the access to world market in agriculture, fertilizers, and so on, by above all lifting its sanctions on the payment systems and agriculture banks. I think the question is, do you think it is heading towards the April 20 deadline that Donald Trump is personally committed to, or will it take longer time as his intelligence people has said?
I think this is a very complicated uh, issue, complicated problem. Um, the April 20th deadline, there's not going to be a comprehensive peace by April 20th. I don't believe so. Um, but I do believe that on April 20th, Donald Trump will be confronted with three distinct um, conclusions. One, that the Russians are dead serious about pursuing peace, and that Russia will do what it takes to achieve that outcome that Donald Trump wants. That Russia is not the problem. The problem are the other two: Ukraine, and in particular Zelensky, and Europe. And after April 20th, Donald Trump will have to make a political decision on whether he steps back and lets Russia just go on to the inevitable victory, even though it's going to cost lives, or does he recognize that Russia is a serious partner and take the moves necessary to terminate Zelensky as the political leadership of Ukraine, to replace him with a leadership that is more conducive to accepting the terms of conflict termination, and also confronting Europe on the consequences of its continued disruption of American plans regarding Ukraine. And we have all the leverage in the world. And Europe actually makes it easy for us. In the short term and the long term, we can collapse the European economy almost instantaneously. We can destroy European political unity by precipitously withdrawing from NATO. There's a number of options available to us that right now are politically difficult to make, but will become easier to make after April 20th if Europe continues to identify itself as a problem, not a solution. So that's what I think is going on here. I don't think it's as simple as, only one issue needs to be resolved by April 20th. I think actually what's happening is a series of parallel, processes going forward that are designed to better define, what their limits are, what you can expect from them. I think Russia will show that it is ready for peace and is ready to work with the United States, not only about Ukraine, but a larger framework of peace. This is why we have a Russian ambassador returning to the United States for the first time in 5 months. And we have the Russians and Americans meeting on a whole bunch of different issues. The normalization of diplomatic relations is a important building block towards, moving forward in a manner that far exceeds simply the scope and scale of Ukraine conflict. But I also think we're going to see that the Ukrainian government will be identified as a fundamental roadblock to any progress in that. That Zelensky is a delusional madman who, if he continues to stay in power, will just guarantee that this conflict continues to the point where Ukraine will be eliminated as a modern nation state. And if that is indeed an undesirable outcome, then Zelensky is a problem that needs to be eliminated, not Ukraine. And I think he will be eliminated one way or the other. Zelensky's time on this earth as president of Ukraine is very limited. In Europe, it's interesting. Europe's trying to posture itself as this big power, but even as they posture, the various pillars upon which they're constructing this artifice are collapsing. When Keir Starmer keeps talking about how Britain is going to take the lead in deploying a ground force into Ukraine, and the British Army has to come out and say, we can't do it. We don't have the ability to do it. It just shows how empty this is. When Macron says the same thing, but the French military is like, well, we can't do it. And then I asked the British and French this: you guys know that your only vector into doing this is Romania, but in Romania we have a political problem. You see, there's a political party that has actually positioned itself to win the upcoming election in May that will terminate all NATO involvement. And if you lose Romania, you have no ability to go into Ukraine, because you can't go through Poland, because that means you go through the American force there, and America will never allow itself to be turned into a tripwire for NATO direct conflict with Russia. So all this European posture, and then we throw upon that the Poles. We're going to build the biggest army in Europe. We're going to be able to beat the Russians. The Polish general, we run out of ammo in 14 days. Oh, I guess we're not going to build the biggest army in Europe, and we're not going to because we don't have. Europe has no capabilities whatsoever, none. And then they commit again diarrhea of the mouth. The French and the British talking about their nuclear weapons. Um, all they guarantee is now that Russia will take targeting of the French and the British very seriously. And they've guaranteed the destruction of their nations and all of Europe in case of a conflict with Russia. Um, that's the stupidity of flexing a nuclear muscle against a nuclear armed superpower. Hint, Iran, hint, um, whatever you think the United States, we are a nuclear armed superpower. And whatever Europe, the French and the British think of Russia, they are a nuclear armed superpower. Um, everything Europe is doing is unsustainable. The 800 billion euro that von der Leyen keeps talking about, they can't afford that. Where's that going to come from? What is it going to buy? How is it going to buy? Um, it's like me talking about buying you know, the new model, the newest model of car that hasn't been built yet. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to go borrow the money from the bank right now at 14% interest. Well, great, Scott. So now I got the money. Did I buy the car? Nope. Car's not going to be ready for 3 to 4 years. Meanwhile, the bank goes, you owe me interest and you got to start repaying the loan. So all the money I took out to buy that car, I'm not even getting the equity off the car. I have to start repaying the loan. So by the time the car comes on market for me to buy it, my money shrunk down. That's how stupid the Europeans are right now. That's how stupid they would be to talk about 800 billion euro and doing stuff. So I think by April 20th, the stupidity of Europe will be exposed and also the nefarious nature of their policy. It's very anti-American, very anti-Trump, and Trump is a very vindictive man, and Europe will pay a heavy price. And so will Zelensky. Trump is also a man who believes in honoring business commitments. I know people are going to laugh at that. No, he doesn't. He backed out everything. At the end of the day, he's a businessman. And with Russia, I think Trump will, as long as Russia maintains this good faith effort it has towards normalizing relations and working with the United States constructively on a variety of issues, including economic cooperation, I think Trump will respect that and will seek to pursue that. So that's what I think is going to happen after April 20th.
Scott, Ritter, thank you so much for an insightful, sensible, cautious, and frank conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.